Oh my goodness, a great way to start the webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our hot seat webinar today, MBA for BPM. Who in the world is this Roland Woldt, and what in the world are we going to talk about around BPM? For those who are joining us from around the world, thank you so much for being here, for having a wonderful open mind to learn and grow on the topic of BPM. Of course, you know, Hugh, we at ARIS really love business process management and everything associated with sort of using process and architecture as a lever for meaningful organization and business process change. But we want to get the experts to come and weigh in on this topic and give us some of their best practices. Now, I'm sure many of you are practitioners of BPM or you're BPM curious. This is an opportunity to grow with some of the best practices honed over years of consulting, of absolutely across the world, across the spectrum of companies, across industries, experience and learnings from the various challenges and successes that we've seen. And I can't think of anyone better than to rock it with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Roland Woldt to our show this afternoon and to the Hot Seat webinar. Roland, the seat's heating up. How are you feeling this morning?
Yeah, I have so many questions, J-M. The first thing, why did you invite me if you want to have experts on the show? So that's one. And the second one is, what was the stuff that you were drinking while you came up with the title of that webinar? Give us a little bit of
Oh,
insight.
we got to make sure that this is we don't fall afoul of any regulatory obligations on this call. So let's say
Ah,
what. But we're going to have this is the whole point of it is, and I think this was something that we actually Roland and I, for those who don't know, host a podcast as well. One of the things we talk about a lot is the lack of education and standardization in terms of understandings from executives and from process leaders on sort of what it means to be a process expert, what process requires, how to approach the challenge of process, and how to achieve goals and show that you've achieved those goals to your sponsors and people who are looking for getting value. Now, one of the things that we talked about in a couple of shows ago was all about like what would you have as a program that you would spread as curriculum. So we talked about like an MBA for AI, an MBA for BPM. Well, this is kind of that idea, taking the standardized approach and saying, if we all were on the same page for it, I think we could achieve greater. And Roland has prepared a fantastic presentation. And Roland, um, before we go into the presentation, I wonder if people want to actually know a little bit more about you. Why should we listen to you today? So give us your bona fides and help our friends out there in hot seat webinar land know who you are.
well, as if I would have expected that question. So obviously, you can all read the words on the slides. So I'm doing this BPM EA stuff for over 25 years, 27 years, 28 years. Damn, I'm old. 28 years now. And I've worked at SAF AG, at IDS Shear, the predecessor organizations of this wonderful institution that I'm happy to be a guest here today. Um, I also worked for many, many years with Accenture and KPMG, having jobs with all the fancy titles, like running the EA practice for the US firm of KPMG, or being the global head of process mining at SAF AG, or being the vice president of important things at one of your competitors. That shall not be named, but is on the slide. Having said that, obviously within that time, I've delivered on projects, scoped them, built teams, uh, had the pleasure for 20 grand a year to press the button in the TOGAF architecture forum, the standard that everybody loves. Um, and about 4 years ago, a little bit more than 4 years ago, I thought I need to bring stuff on virtual paper. And I started a domain that I paid for since 2011 called What's Your Baseline? And I thought, okay, if 10 years later I don't use it, why should I pay for it? So I started writing articles, and then I noticed writing is hard. And I asked J-M if he would be interested to be a podcast host. And I think, J-M, it took you about 3 milliseconds to say yes. And that the rest is history. We've recorded over 100 episodes, very interesting conversations, and all that stuff. And then to close the curve, I thought, oh, talking is too easy, and I wrote 2 books. One is already out, and the other one will come out in about 2 weeks ish. And you see that obviously in the lower right-hand corner, and I will talk about this a little bit later.
Congratulations, Roland. And it's
Thank you.
such a
Thank you.
pleasure to have that sort of expertise brought to bear today. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have lots of questions as we go along. I'm seeing the chat is blowing up with people from all over the world welcoming each other. Well, guess what? I'm going to put Roland under the hot seat, and you can too. Because in today's conversation, this is meant to be a little bit more interactive than normal. Your burning questions will light a fire under Roland as he has to answer them live on screen as we go through a presentation and all the components that he thinks is important about BPM. And then we take your feedback and shape the conversation to help drive it for you and your organization. So don't be shy, throw in those questions, and let's see how much of an expert Mr. Roland Woldt actually is live.
All right.
So let's define some terms here. Let's get it set out. We're talking about BPM, and that involves process intelligence as an overarching term. Define the term. Tell us what we should be looking out for.
Yeah. So process intelligence. That's well. I will have a slide about Forrester in there. So I leave it to, in this case, Bernhard Schaffrick. If you're on the webinar, Bernhard, hi. But in my mind, and I will talk about that a little bit later, obviously you need to know what you're doing, right? So I think and I hope it's safe for work, the typical question that an analyst has is basically three questions, where does it stink? Why does it stink? And how do I remove the stink? Right? So for those of you who have little kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And process intelligence gives you that visibility into, I guess, the first two things, figuring out where it stinks, and then obviously having a closer look at why on this. And that's why I thought when you asked me to come up with some slides for this talk here, I thought it might be worth talking about process intelligence, right? Because
Yeah.
what it does is it makes your processes uh, live and hopefully evergreen, right? Because I think every one of us has seen too many process diagrams that collected some virtual dust in some database, and it was a huge effort to create them, and then nobody looked at this after a system was implemented. And then you do changes to the system and nobody updates the processes. Does it sound familiar? So
Really?
yeah, unfortunately, process intelligence is obviously a way to make that evergreen because you will interact with them, right? Because you measure things, you take a look at what's actually happening. So what I want to talk about is in a loose sequence, the word section is a little bit too harsh on this slide here, in a loose sequence about, okay, what is process intelligence? What's the problem? How does it fit into the process lifecycle? Because despite some vendors trying to pitch it differently, process mining is not standalone and enough. You need to have more. And then I talk a little bit about, well, how does it work for those of you who haven't been exposed to process mining in this case? And then obviously I will talk about a 6-step approach that I've done in many, many process mining projects and just know that it works. And that will bring you to a successful process mining project. So
That's
without
great.
further ado, let's start with
Yeah.
the first one.
Let's talk about the problem here, because I think that a lot of people in organizations notice the outcomes of problems. Like they
Hmm.
notice that there are slowdowns in production because of missing materials, or that they can't get what they resources they need in time. They notice customer feedback or retention problems where the outcome is that it's a bad experience and they walk away. Or
Yeah.
they're noticing that internally it feels like it's always chaos. So people see, kind of like you would in a medical institution, people see symptoms.
Hmm.
But tell me a little bit more about what we're looking for when it comes to problems, and where you might find some of those typical problems in an enterprise that hasn't embraced a BPM lifestyle.
Yeah. So I'm going back, whatever, 20 years ish, when everybody was in the craze. Oh, we need to uh, draw processes because we want to implement SAP or any standard thing. And people said, no, uh, we don't want to have custom development. It's too complex. Let's standardize on this. And then SAP gave a reference process set, and everybody said, oh, now we have to adjust the organization and whatnot. So then people started drawing process models, right? And as I said a couple of minutes ago, well, what is it, right? How is it seen today? So if you, JM, and you're, I guess, 3 days younger than I am, so you're closer to leaving university than I am, if you would ask the average graduate what he thinks about processes, right, and you would show them a process diagram, what would be the first thing?
That
Boring.
seems old, seems boring, seems
Yeah,
I don't
boring.
understand it.
Yeah. So the question is, where do people see the value add? You see that nobody follows the process. Maybe they just don't know and they just muddle through. And then the diagram itself doesn't have any actionable insight. There's no thing in there that says, well, this is what we really do. Or, that, as I like to say, what happens when an auditor shows up for his audit? What are the first two questions that he asks GM?
Is this how you're actually doing it? Is the
No,
first one?
that's the second one. The first one is, what do you do, right? And you
Uh,
pull out your little map, and then we all laugh. And then the second question is, what do you really do, right?
yeah.
And that is where you hopefully pull out some process mining stuff, right? But the problem is that the traditional way of just it's a huge effort that was taken there to create process diagrams who still have a value, right? It has outlived its purpose in the way how we've done it. It was a huge effort, and again, how much virtual dust can you brush off? So to the rescue, process intelligence, right? And here's the definition that Bernard Schaffrick from Forrester put in his WAVE report for process mining, right? So the way how they define it is, they say process intelligence, and this is the only criticism that I have, is that he constrains it to products, right? I don't want to say it's a lifestyle, but you want to have analytics data driven about your processes.
Mm,
So the first shift, away from the SME who just tells you what he wants you to tell, right, to a data driven approach, which is great, right? It's also not just human processes, but also processes that have system support, and don't get me started on my opinion about how human AI is, which it isn't, right? So it covers that as well. The second thing is you provide those analytics mainly based on mining capabilities, right? And I will talk about process mining today. I know ARIS has a task mining component. That's something for somebody who's smarter than me who can talk about that. I will stick with the bread and butter here. But the
yeah.
main idea
It's
is
an
that
upcoming webinar for those who are following our webinar series. Don't worry, we're going to cover that very soon.
here you go. Here you go. Yeah. And then obviously you do have the main idea is that process intelligence enables decision making, right? So you have the data, you see the different options, you make the call, right? This is the change that we do. And then obviously we all know that ARIS has a modeling capability where you can model out those different options, right? It has a simulation capability where you run it through and you see the numbers and then you create a little table. What's your baseline? Hint, hint. What's your baseline simulation? What's your option one? What's your option two? And then you can see how you will improve before you even start wrenching on something. And I think this is a qualitative difference that, in my observation, only a few people or a few organizations have implemented, right? Despite what others say, how awesome process mining is and whatnot. I think the big firms, they have done some stuff because they have the money, but when you think about the non-Fortune 100 or Fortune 500, well, they have some way to go, I think.
Yeah, and Roland, if we can
So,
just stop on that side for a second, because I think that
mhm,
when we look at the claim that it enables decision making, like evidence-based decision making,
mhm,
people were doing something like this and have been doing something like this for a long time with BI. So let's start setting the
mm,
stage. Like, where is business intelligence, BI, like the dashboards you're throwing up in, like, name it your dashboard tool of choice,
yeah.
differ from PI, and why is process intelligence providing a different kind of data that enables a different kind of decision making that we think is more effective?
It's the scope. So
Mm,
when you look at it in BI, right, you have all those tools, Tableau, Click, whatever, right, that you use Power BI, that you use for this. What do people do? They look at mostly lagging metrics. What have
Yeah.
we done in the past? What were our sales in the last quarter? How many widgets did we produce? Whatever you measure, right? That to me is like driving in a car, just looking at your rearview mirror, right?
Yeah.
While when you think about process mining, which if you've built those fancy connections, right, to your source systems, you get real-time data, right? So that's like, if we stay with the car metaphor, that's like having a speedometer for your car. So now, JM, you tell me, would you love to drive a car just look in your rearview mirror, or do you want to have a fancy windshield with that heads-up display that tells you that you're over the speed limit?
I mean,
Uh,
obviously, I want to see the current state, but I also want to see the future, and that's where I think is sort of prompt for the next part of
that's
this
that's
presentation.
that
Because
that's
what do you
that's
do
when you
now? Yeah,
yeah
now you
that's
know.
when you turn a JM. That's when you turn around the rearview mirror and have it forward looking, right?
So show me what the life cycle looks like now
Okay.
that we want to look through the windshield and
Yes.
see a potential future.
So I keep it brief, right? Because I wrote a whole book about that. Hint, hint. In my mind, you as a process organization, you need to think about, okay, what is the whole process slash solution lifecycle? And the way how I describe it is in 5 steps, right? So you see a blue design layer and a green execution layer where actually things happen in reality, right? I would assume the audience of this webinar is more in the blue area. So what you typically did in the past is you start with that dark blue dot on the top. And in lack of a better term, this is the strategy phase, the high level design, the repository, the hundreds of diagrams, and how do you manage this? So stuff that ARIS is doing for over 30 years and doing well, right? The idea behind is that you capture your as is. So what runs? The design of, or the documentation, or the visualization of what is actually happening right now in your systems, in your organization. And the idea is that at this dark blue dot, you can start doing analysis. Remember, where does it stink, right? And you could do this manually. Um, and you would say, okay, this is an area that I want to fix. This is an area. This is an area. So you come up with a prioritization. Then I say, what's more important? And then you go into that right. You see my mouse? Yeah, that right um, lighter blue dot where you say, okay, now I take one of those areas and I develop a solution architecture for one transition state. So
Mm-hmm.
in non-gobbledygook, when you think about it, you have an idea to implement it, you might come up with a thing that might be too big to chew in one swoop. So you say, okay, I'm going to create multiple phases, right? And we're going to change this and we're going to change that. So transition state basically just means one of those phases. But what you need to do is you need to look at all those other areas, not just the process. What's the system landscape? What is the risk and control landscape that applies to it and whatnot? So what you do is you have an idea of how that process should work in 1.5 years, but for this exercise, you just look at the next 6 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever your time frame is, and you describe the difference between your baseline and your transition state one, the
Mm-hmm.
thing that you want to implement. And the outcome of this whole thing is basically a hopefully approved solution design. These are the changes that we do. And hopefully you've done things like simulation in that phase as well, so that you can create your business case and say, yeah, we think we're 50% more prettier after we got that little surgery done, you know? So
And
then
Roland,
we go,
the technical teams need this kind of thing in order to implement. Like we hear a lot of times, technical teams saying, like, "Well, the process is buried in the
mm-hmm,
implementation itself. It's
mm-mm,
just
mm-mm.
how we do things." Well, why do you need to separate these out, and what do you pass across that sort of dotted line
Yeah.
in order to make that implementation more effective?
So there's this, so good question. I think you need, like a real architect, the guys drawing plans for houses, you have different views of that house, if you will, right? You have the high-level floor plan, you have the electrical plan, you have the plumbing plan, you have the landscaping plan, all those things, right? Um, if I transfer it, I liked a lot what SAP promoted for years now, where they make a distinction between a business blueprint and a technical blueprint, right? So a set of diagrams, a set of descriptions that then are used to communicate, like a real architect communicates with his clients, right? And say, do you want to have this? What are the windows that you want to have in there? You have options, you know. So I think the benefit of those blueprints is you have a thing that everybody can look at and literally be on the same page, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other added benefit is obviously when it comes later to the monitoring phase, the other light blue box, you have something to compare with, and the regulators will love it. But
Yeah.
anyway, so
How many
I'd
times have you
like
done
to.
have like a technical blueprint that's been
Mhm.
created by some line of business, and the implementation decisions did not reflect that? Like there were
Or
some functional
yeah.
requirements that just never made it into production, or there was some decisions that are offline, and when you do the validation later on, the
Mhm.
deployment doesn't match.
Or yes, yeah. So you're a little bit ahead. So you take this, it's approved, you go into that first green bubble, you implement stuff, right? And what you
Yeah.
describe is what I would call you have a status as designed and you have a status as implemented. And there
Yeah.
might be a discrepancy between it, right? You need to resolve this during your implementation. But once you've implemented it, you go live and hopefully have a big party because you accomplished something. But before you have this and get wasted, your as implemented goes back into the dark blue box here, right? It becomes your new what runs, right? And then you go into your execution. You just run it. And the need here is twofold. You need to see, and this is maybe where traditional BI comes into place, right? You need to have dashboards. You want to make sure if you're a car manufacturer that your car doesn't fall off the production line. Um, and if not, you've seen all those videos of whatever German car manufacturers where people can pull on a chain and the whole conveyor belt stops and all those things. That is exactly what you're thinking here, right? You want to know and you want to monitor your day-to-day execution. Do we produce the widgets that we're supposed to produce? So then fast forward a couple of weeks, months, your choice, you end up in the last phase, you know, the measure and analyze phase. And that is where the mining technologies come in. Because
Mm.
what do you want to do? You want to take a step back as the business analyst and say, okay, I had that great idea how my solution design should look like. Do we actually do what we're supposed to do? Question mark, right? There might be a discrepancy, right? So you want to understand and analyze why those discrepancies are there. And the main idea is that you get new ideas that feed the beast again, and you start the circle again, right? But there's also a side activity that when you do your analysis and it's in real time, you might notice that certain thresholds are not met or are met, right? So you might want to trigger the direct interaction. You know, your process mining realize in real time that the car is about to fall off the conveyor belt.
Hmm.
Do you let it run because you're a business analyst? It's not your job to do this, or do you raise the alarm and say, "Stop the conveyor belt! You know, fix the damn car before it falls off the thing." Right. So, but the main idea is obviously to go new ideas, start this circle again. And I'm a big advocate about do this in a structured and a planned way. You know, the time spent, and I don't want to quote Mike Tyson, the time spent on um, creating a plan is time well spent
Yeah.
before somebody you punches you in the mouth.
Well, here's the thing, and I think that you brought up a really good point about the alerts and things like that. I feel like a lot of organizations also run a sort of on break fixes where they say, "Oh, just tell me where there's a problem, and let's automate away the
Hmm.
problem as they become revealed to us." And
Yeah.
I think that's a fallacy for so many reasons, but one of which is that when you automate away problems that result as a from bad process, what do you get? You just get faster bad process, but that doesn't solve the
Yeah.
problem at all. And
Well,
I
that
actually
that's.
a question from the audience about something like this is that the
Mhm.
technology that underpins this Thank you to, there we are. That technology that underpins this. Tell me a little bit more about like the methodologies and technologies that actually help you get here.
Yeah. So obviously we're in an ARIS webinar. I'm singing the song of the mouse that the head that feeds me.
Just
Yeah. So
specific to
yeah.
that.
So what you see is typically you see process mining and you see task mining. Right. Those are
Okay.
the two things. Obviously, when you Google those terms, you see the different vendors there. Um, it's a handful, right? It's not super many, right? ARIS is one of them. In my perspective, and I know that some people will now cringe a little bit, and I oversimplify, process mining is the higher level thing, right? And we talk about how it works. And then when you need to drill down into a certain task where you can't see it from the event logs, then you might deploy task mining, right? Or you might deploy task mining, which is recording steps, right? And then aggregating them to, or recording activities, and then aggregating them to abstract steps that then be part of the process, right? You can use that if you don't have documented processes, right? If you're
So
really
let's talk
starting
about
with a
where
blank sheet.
process fits into this part of the cycle because I want to make sure that we can
Yeah,
set
here
people
it's
right starting point for process mining is a good example.
yeah, it's definitely here, right? And you again, I will talk in the next slides about it. You can use it to discover processes, right? To give that trigger, not only just improvements. But let's move on. I'm looking at the time. So when you look at this, and I'm pretty sure J-M, you will share the slides
All right.
or the recording afterwards. Just some ideas how tools can support it, right? So you see mining and robotic process discovery is task mining, right? In this, you see dashboards for monitoring and analysis purposes. You see reference content, analysis, simulation. In those phases, you see maybe a technical interface to synchronize the content, what was designed versus what was implemented to resolve this. So, and there's more, right? This is just an example of how that fits, but for the purpose of today, it happens in this bubble here. So, how does it, on a very high level, work, right? So, it's all based on your execution data, right? So, what you do is you look at events, and if you think about it, whatever we do somewhere, we create footsteps, right? You create a PO. The PO has a number. It has content. What do you want to buy, right? It has who created the PO. When was it created? These type of informations. And oops, that was so fast. And you take this and feed it into a process mining tool. And then the process mining tool does some data analysis, right? It might have additional input like your reference process, your blueprint, how things
One
should be
thing to
done
know.
to do conformance check and all those things, right? The outcomes are mostly this discovered processes and identification of process improvement opportunities, right? And as I said before, triggering of actions to interact with the execution, right?
So what
So,
I have a question from one of our audience members because
mhm,
this one's actually really specific to what you're talking about right now, and it's something that a lot of our customers at ARIS struggle with, and I want to sort of bring this together. It people have partial process automation, custom
mhm,
made systems, not really process oriented. Thank you, Boris, for asking this. So it's hard to extract process transactions or instances. At least that's the claim. So how do
yeah,
you apply process mining or intelligence in these cases that Boris finds quite common?
that is a very good question because uh, for those of you who haven't been exposed to it, a lot of the work that you do is data modeling, right?
Mm,
You need to create and prepare the data that you get in a way that process mining tools, and I will talk about that in a slide or so, can understand. So, for example, SAP is not process oriented, right? So now you have to, and in ARIS process mining, there's a function to create case IDs based on different activities, but you have to create the columns in your tables that you will feed the beast with accordingly. So for example, if you have a step called create purchase requisition, right? And the next step is create purchase order. Well, guess what? If the purchase order has a purchase requisition number, then you know it's the same instance, right? If the purchase order doesn't have a purchase requisition number, because it could be auto replenishment or whatever, you know it's a different instance, right? The process starts there. What you have to do is you have to prepare the format of the table accordingly, that there's a placeholder for the purchase requisition and vice versa in the other table, right? So there's a lot of things to do in the data modeling phase. It sounds scarier than it is, but it is a little bit tedious to really understand your data. You know, how is it wired up to be able to create those instances, those case IDs, which I will show in a future slide. But let's
And
move on. I
I'm
want
looking at it here as well. There is some element here that can be done in task finding, which I think is
to.
interesting. You can, instead of looking at how the systems work, you look at how the people interact with systems, the screens they go to, what they do on those screens. And well, it's not going to provide you a blueprint of the automation. That's actually buried in code. Sometimes in technical documentation, you can extract from as well. What it will tell you is the way that your business people are using it. And in doing so, you can extract out the business process that is being
But that's
executed again, even if
yeah.
it's not fully into the automation.
But there's a lot of noise, you know,
There is.
JM, because
Yeah.
we all work on different things at the same time ish, and then we occasionally switch to Amazon to see if our delivery is on time, and sometimes we watch a YouTube video to learn something and then get distracted about that other shiny thing, you know,
Wait,
which
are
is
you
not part.
multitasking during this webinar? Roland, are you telling me in the background you're watching a YouTube video?
Oh
I
wait,
better
yeah,
be.
I need to stop it now. I need to stop it now. Yes. So, anyways, so you have different things. So I think you need to abstract it a little bit. But to come
Yeah,
back to this, to me, the task mining abstraction result is just another source, another event source for process mining, right?
yeah.
And again, it's data modeling. So how do
Let's
you
let's
use
talk
it? I
about the
go,
use cases, Roland. Let's move on to the
yeah,
yeah, exactly. Like, what are you trying to get out of this? And I think there's a question, a much longer question by Katrin, who we will definitely answer at the end. Trust me, about the value proposition here. But what are
yeah.
these and why are they valuable to a company?
Is that a question for now or for later, Jam? For
Let's start
later.
with this now, and then we're going to go to Katrin's question later because it's
Okay,
really cool.
so
Long.
when I look at the use case, and this is not, I have no intention that this is complete, right? These are just the ones that we saw the most, you know. So, and I go through that fast. And again, you have the recording, you can see the slides, you know. Ping me if you want to have a PDF of them. You see the continuous improvement stuff. This is what we were talking about all day. You know, the business analyst who wants to improve. You see the process owner who wants to make sure that the processes are executed as they are planned. You know, what we've discussed. You have the compliance people who want to measure. The question is, what do you really do, right?
Mhm.
Um, you can use it for process automation, right? To say, hey, this is what we see. We think we can automate this with AI or without AI or whatever fancy tool you have, you know, and then do some simulation on the real data and the no, draw a blank prediction, the prediction of how you think the process will improve with your changes. And then you can use it in, which I really liked, which we had way back when, the approach of measuring first, you know, before you start designing your blueprint, take a look at what's actually happening, you know, and not just make assumption. And JM, you mentioned it, obviously after your implementation, you want to have the deployment validation. Does everything work as it should, right? Again, there's tons of more. I'm pretty sure everyone in the audience will have a great idea. Oh, but in my organization, it's this. You know, these are just the 6 ones that I and UJM have seen very frequently.
A million
So
times. So
yeah,
Roland, but besides how process mining works, because I think
mhm,
that this is something we can probably move through quickly. I think that we want to get to how to run this, how to implement this
yes,
as a technology, and
yep,
what you'll need both as a procedure and as a skill set or an organization that
yeah,
underpin a project around mining and eventually the
mhm,
intelligence that goes into decision making.
yeah. Just to close the loop, there's 2 things, 2 slides that I want to show really briefly in the next 2 minutes. One is um, how does process mining work? Right. You might have heard object-centric process mining and case-centric process mining. The majority of process mining tools that I see do case-centric. process mining. This is what you see on the slide here. So this is basically where you see a data set and you have Boris's question, the instances that you created, and they're the same, and then you know, okay, those steps belong together. The minimum that you need is that case ID, the activity name, which is the event in your event log, and at least one timestamp, ideally two. Enough said about that. So how does it work? It takes then those instances, and for each instance, it looks at the timestamps and looks what are the steps that happened. So in one instance, you have A, B, C, D. The other instance that you see, it's A, B, and D, so they omit C, and the third one omits B and D, but has a step E, whatever, right? And then process mining takes it and creates this aggregated view, the spaghetti diagram, right, of all the mess, all the variants that you might see, and then you can filter, you can move some dials to make it more readable and try to figure out why do we have the spaghetti diagram? Why isn't it ABCD, right? Like in our instance one, if that's the happy path, why do people omit stuff? Why does anyone invent a step E? I don't know, right? Those are questions that you will see in process mining. So to your question, J-M, so how should you approach it? And this is dear and near to my heart, and Katrin already knows it because, well, she's going through this right now, is a 6-step process on a very high level. But before we get to this, I'd like to point you to the bottom of it. Who are the typical roles that are involved, right? So I see business representatives, I see IT folks, engineers, I see data people, I see our hero, the process analyst, right? And I see some risk people here. So when you go through the steps, you see those little dots that I put up here, which basically tells you who do you need in which phase or in which step. But on a high level, and in lack of a better term, if you have better ideas, happy to change that. I called it developer strategy. It's basically two things. The first thing is you figure out, why do I want mining technology in my organization? And what is my plan for it? Do I start with a pilot? Do I roll it out on a big scale? Do I force it to connect it to runtime systems dynamically, or is a CSV enough? Whatever, right? Then in that phase, you also look at, and my recommendation in general is have small projects, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Do many of those, right? One of your competitors is well known for a high price tag and long projects, because they say, oh yeah, you need to connect everything to our tool, and then you get obviously the big benefit.
You said it. I did.
Yeah. I don't want to. Anyways, that's one approach, right? My approach is different. I think you should do quick things, quick turnaround, because you need to show momentum, right? You need to show results. And when you get, and my recommendation is pick a process where you can just get an export, right? A CSV or an Excel or whatever, right? And stitch it together. Because you might find out your process is actually running to your expectations. So why would you spend the time and effort to connect everything to it instead of moving on to the next process where you might find some big improvement ideas? Right? I would rather say if the process currently runs as I expected, well, schedule another export. You keep all the dashboards, all the calculations, schedule that for 6 months, 12 months down the road, run it again and see if it still runs good. Done. It's an exercise of an hour, well, a day maybe, but quick.
Right? Running this multiple times is that each time you choose to enact a process change, you've taken the opportunity at the end and you've made a change. The next time you run it, you can also do not just deployment validation, but value realization. Because now you have the opportunity to tell people what a difference you made, and then to spur the next budget for the next project. Because ultimately, as process improvement like people, we want to be improving processes, but we need to be showing that we've done the work and achieved our goals to earn more money.
And that's why you have those nice timeline charts, in as a widget in the dashboard to say, okay, if we look at production numbers, my car manufacturer, do we really produce 20% more cars? We know on July 1st we implemented that change. So does the curve go up or not? right? That is the interesting question. Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And
Yeah.
once you've set it up, you don't have to tweak it a lot, except of course you would have a major process change, right? But
Hmm.
you build the foundation and then you just tweak it, right? That's
Yeah.
way less effort than starting from scratch all the time.
Now, but
But
talk about
let's
that.
come back.
I dig into one piece of the things here because on this page is something that I've already seen people are a little afraid of. They're a little wary of, which is extracting data and using it to actually create an effective event log. So I want to
Yeah,
dig into what does that mean because just getting to event logs feels like a big barrier, mental barrier, sometimes
mental.
technical barrier for people who are looking to get started in this conversation.
So I would start a little bit earlier in this step here when you identify your process, right?
Yeah.
Which is so I would start literally with a napkin, right? Draw it out on a piece of paper. We think the process is this if you don't have anything, right? And then you do that for multiple processes, the ideas that you have. And then one of the questions is, do I have the data? Can I get data for each of those steps in there, right? And the answer might be no, so you move on, right? But then you also want to look at what is the the best process for my first project, right? If you're a newbie, if you get started with it. So what you want to do is you want to go and don't take the low-hanging fruit, right? Because that doesn't have an impact, right? Oh yeah, it's a non-mission critical process. You did the PTO request process, right? Um,
Not a ton of value in that process, is
Yeah,
there?
you also don't want to take the big hairy goal. When the guys in the past said, "Oh, we should have replaced our ERP system 25 years ago." Don't take that because you might be super busy with that, and then there's a big silence because you're busy, right? You don't communicate.
So
So
it's the
pick
Goldilocks
something
process,
in the middle.
not
Pick something in the middle, right?
just right.
Yeah, so that you can show, oh, look, we did this in again 4 or 5 weeks, not longer, right? This is the outcome. This is the suggestion. Oh, we calculated the ROI of our idea. Well, we're gonna reduce the cost, we increase productivity, we whatever, right? Whatever your levers of the process are. Then you go into your system logs. Again, I put it in here. I don't know if you can read it. It says optional here, right? My recommendation for your first project is don't switch the slides, go back, is don't build any connection, right? Take an export. Go to your IT guy and say, give me a CSV, right? I need these columns, right? Based on what you identify as hypothesis, uh, where you think you have performance problems, and that's why you have all people in here. So get this extracted from the system, that just shoot it over by email, SharePoint, whatever, right? And then the big work starts, the event log, right? So um, there's different ways to skim a cat. Don't want to go too much into detail. The way how it's done in ARIS is you need some SQL-ish skills with it. There's other ways to do it that might be more appropriate for a business analyst, but again, I'm a guest here, so I don't want to poo-poo on it. There's room for improvement. Let's say it like this. But this is where you take your different event logs and you bring it into a format that your process mining tool can understand, right? The big takeaway is once you have your data model, validate it with your stakeholders. Because what you want to avoid is the situation that you put it in your tool, you're so damn proud of it, and you say, look what a mess I found. And the client comes back and say, nah, that's not us.
Yeah.
It's a data model. You failed. Go away. No, what you want is you want to have a separate step here and say, okay, this is what I found, right? Can we check with the source system if that is true? You poke holes in there, Mr. Client, right? Because you want them to go back and say, I trust you. I believe you. I understand how you did your data model, which transformations you did, which filtering, which joining, which concatenation you did, while doing this. And I believe that it's correct. You get your check before you even go, and of course you've done it before, right? You have it in your tool. You want to know if it works, but before you show them the big spaghetti diagram. The
Yeah,
other
you
thing
want
you might want to,
to read out before you get to the point where it's at an actual decision making time.
yeah,
If you don't do
no.
that, boy, I think you have the same response you and I from stakeholders where they just say, "Yeah, it's not my data."
Yeah, that's not us. Yeah.
Not
The
us.
other thing is, and I want to speed up a little bit, is you want to create your reference process, right?
Yeah.
In this time, transfer your napkin to a BPMN diagram, right? Maybe with the information that you get from the event logs, who's doing what. You can do some analysis on this as well, right? The traditional stuff. Maybe you got some ideas. Oh, this doesn't look great. I think, why do we treat this thing differently downstream than here? Potential compliance problem, question mark, so you have this, you bring it in those light red steps, you do your analysis following your hypotheses that you identified in the green steps here, and again you do a presentation, right? My recommendation is, this is the what we found, right? And I have two recommendations. One is, I like very much the fishbone diagrams, and J-M put in the Japanese name of those puppies, where you follow problems, right? And you ask the question why until you're at the bottom of it and you have a sufficient answer. Do we have those delays because Jim Bob in that other organization doesn't handle the escalation well? Is Jim Bob a slacker? You know, that's something you can test, right? And the answer might be yes or no, right? So you get to the point to say the why. And then the question is, if Jim Bob is not the slacker, why doesn't it work? So you go even further. So don't stop, first recommendation, don't stop by importing your event log in the process mining tool, build a nice dashboard and say, I'm done. You're not done. You need to
Yeah.
have the answer why, right? And you need to have your hypotheses, because people ask, how can I improve? How can I make it faster? How do I remove this bottleneck? How do I get Jim Bob to work more? These things. And then the second recommendation is, do a presentation of the whys and get buy-in for it. By that point, you have some ideas how you can tweak the process, right? But stop here, because you might come back and they might say, oh, look, that's great, but can you investigate this as well? Right. So I indicated with that little loop here, because you might go back to your data, you might go back to your data extraction. The recommendation is keep those iterations to a bare minimum, one or
But
two.
Roland,
And
if I can ask
and
you
you
about that, how do you stop the people from getting scope creep? They get excited about this idea. What do you
mhm.
tell them to make sure that we get to actually deliver a result that is concrete, that is achievable before we move on to the next layer of analysis?
We do have a limited time for this project, right? We found an answer so far, right? Which is very obvious. You, JM, raise a very good question. I think it's worth doing a second iteration of that process where we then
Mhm.
do this and you put it on a parking lot, right? So you blame your limited thing, because what do you want? You want to have 12 process mining projects in a year instead of one. Because the question, the effect that you just described, could happen with a big one after 1 year, right? So you want to have the quick iteration. Anyways,
So,
so yeah.
Roland, you've been talking a lot about hypotheses as well, and I want to get into this. Like, what does testing a hypothesis look like, and also how do you generate hypotheses? Because one of the ways that I've seen it being done is literally just listening to people, the end
hmm
executors who know what the process is and who have
Yeah.
legitimate complaints about its performance.
Take your first process mining project as a learning project.
Hmm.
So everyone in here, everyone starts, right? For everyone, this process here, the 6 steps is new. Hopefully not for you, JM, because you're the facilitator of the project, right? You should have done that. But what I notice is people need to go through the whole process one time, soup to nuts. And when you go and say, JM, nice to meet you, never met you before. Why do you think this process doesn't work? Right? And then you say, oh, I need your hypotheses. And they ask, what do you want from me? Right? So take your first project, I wouldn't say throw away, but take it as a learning thing, right? Because then you familiarize your audience with that 6-step process here, and they know what to expect in the next iterations, and they're better prepared. So what I've seen is that for project number 2 with the same group, they already came up with a long list of things. I want to know 1, 2,
Mm-hmm.
3, 4, 5, right? That is that is different. In the first session, typically you see silence and blank stares. So you have to put up your clown's nose and do the sing and dance there. But after that, typically it works better. but to close it out, and I know we're back at time, I want to have some QA, right? While you're doing this, you already have some ideas of your improvement opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Of course. This is the phase where you formalize it. And what I would recommend is do it in a two-step way. Let's skip all that nonsense. You want to have in your first phase, in the green steps, you want to ask your client, what does a good process look like for you? And what I'm referring to is, and I have 5 here, you might have a couple of more levers of a process, right? You see things like capacity. How many widgets can we put through the process? How long
Mhm.
does it take? What does it cost? What's the experience? What's the quality? How compliant are we? Right? And the answer is different depending on who you ask. Right? I'm cheap. I want to have the cost being the least stuff. Well, the project management triangle. You can get good, fast, and cheap. Pick two, right? It applies here as well, except that you have a little bit more levers, right? So
Mhm.
what you want to do is you want to see where your client is and see, is he a cheapskate, or is he like J-M, somebody who wants to have the best experience for everyone, or whatever, right? Get this. And you will see how your ideas line up on that. So each
By the way,
idea,
one of my friends that I really respect does an excellent exercise where he takes a set of executives through this exact questionnaire, but
mhm.
separately, and then showcases all
Oh,
of the
sure.
results aggregated to each other, and also the distribution of results. So the how many voted
Yep,
for each
yep,
part of it.
yep. That might be
And
interesting. Yeah,
it's
that might
incredibly
be very
revealing.
interesting.
But the
So
aggregate and the discussion needs to come to a conclusion that you can actually build off of.
work with.
Like what
Yeah.
matters most.
Yep. So either way, 100% agreed, Jam. 100% agreed. So what you do is you do a sniff test. How does your improvement idea fit into this? Right? Does it really appease JM, the tough client, or not? So you sort it out, or it goes lower in the pile, right? And then you do the second step is where you do the calculation. If your suggestion is, well, let's hire 5 more people, right? Your cost will go up. Your compliance might go down, you know, because it's wetware, right? It's not machines. Your customer experience might go up, right? Your capacity goes up, your times go up or down in this case. So the good thing. So you do the calculation. And what you want is you want to create uh, a prioritized list of suggestions.
Mhm.
And for the top ones, you want to have the ROI and the sniff test and all those things so that they can decide on. So I'm thinking 3, 4, 5, not 250, which
Yeah.
might be your long list of stuff, right? So that would be then the opportunities that you want to go through. Last content slides. What are
Oh
the
my
do's
goodness.
and
Yes.
don'ts? What are the do's and don'ts? Oh, I have more slides. So,
Oh
but
yeah,
you know
yeah.
what's coming. So what are the do's and don'ts when you get started? Right. What I've seen is in the left-hand side, process mining as a pure IT exercise. Some guy read about it, said, that's interesting, I want this. Right. And then you have useless POVs and mini pilots, and people say, man, because they
It feels
just
like
see
an
it as an
exercise,
IT
right?
exercise. Yeah, well, the other things, obviously, you need to have objectives and ideally hypotheses. You underestimate the complexity of your data, right? That's so 70-80% of your time will be data driven, right? The other thing is um, don't try to eat the elephant at once, right? Cut it into smaller projects. Don't try everything at once, And then the last thing is don't you don't look at the full process lifecycle, right? Because it has its place. We spoke about that, upper left-hand corner. What you should
Yeah.
do is on the right-hand side, do those quick iterations. Momentum is a deliverable, as one of my bosses once said. You want this. Like I said, use the first project to learn, right? Make it mandatory to add process mining to every implementation project, because then you get your controlling, right? And by the way, don't leave your BI friends behind. Bring them on the train, right? Um, the other thing is more along the life cycle. Think about your process management maturity. Can you do all those things that I mentioned in the circle, in the 6-step process, and all those things? And lastly, get help when you get started. Don't try to figure it out yourself. right? Hire someone, read books, listen to podcasts, whatever, right? Ask people, right? It's not wizardry, but it's also not trivial. So get help.
Mhm. And by the way, there's a good question about something on this slide that I wanted to pull up here, because this is an example of like how do we get end-to-end workflows between a mix of tasks performed in various tools and manual actions? How do you
Hmm.
actually map the complex process to streamline and improve it? This is a question that directly sort of ties into what you're talking about with the complexity of the
Yeah.
context within which you do this. How would you see Carlos's question sort of solved for various organizations you've worked in?
I think it happens in those green steps at the beginning. When I said, how do you pick a process, right? Um, it's the value question. The other question is, where do you cut your processes, right? If you really go there, you could print out all processes of your organization and lay them on the floor of a gym, right? And you have a big maze. That doesn't make sense. So at some point in time, you make a cut, right? The one thing that I would recommend is when you do your end-to-end shaping, do not, when you think about a pyramid, that has vertical slices, do not
Mhm.
stay within a slice, right? Cross over multiple slices. They're called procure to pay, order to cash, or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And that assumes you have procurement in there, you have logistics in there, you have finance in there, right? Try to get this, and then over time build that up, just like you would create your process hierarchy in general. But it's more art than hard science, if you will, how to cut those, and it depends on your stakeholders, how open they are. I've seen some very stubborn folks, um, and sometimes it felt. I was working on a big project for 5 years with the German Armed Forces where we did that exercise. Sometimes it felt like a Turkish bazaar. You were negotiating. If we do that project and we take that little process piece from you into our project, do you pick up the cost for that? Because then we can buy the bigger thing. So it's a little bit of negotiation, right? But the good
Yeah,
news
and
is,
if I can interject a little bit on that as well, Carlos, one of the things I see a lot is this hybridization of process and task mining, particularly when you have those end-to-end workflows that pass through multiple systems, so you're stitching them together, and through manual activities. And that's where there is going to be a more complex technical landscape if you want to get it all, which is where
Mhm.
Roland's bringing up the idea of sort of very clear scoping. One of the characteristics of a good process mining project is that data is accessible,
Mhm.
because you can want it all you want, but if there's no access to the information, you're not going to be able to use the tools that are available to you to get that out there.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted, one more question from Catherine, because this, we promised we would answer this question. And then we'll go to the last couple slides here and get people looking at what you might do for the next phase of things. But how do you actually pitch this? What should be included in a one-page like position paper on how process intelligence is valuable?
I think obviously it's and Katrin, I assume you're asking for keywords, right, that you want to put on your slide. Um, I think if you find a comparison like I did before with driving your car, and process mining is the speedometer, you can find some arguments for it because what you don't measure, you can't improve, right? You want to know how good you're doing things. You want to have a wider perspective, not only on the process, but when it goes to solutioning, you want to look at apps and other views, org and risks and all that type of stuff, right? So it's more about the reasoning. Why would you want to do process management or architecture in general, right? What are the benefits there? And then you have obviously arguments, as I said before. You bring people literally on the same page, right? So it's not what J-M alluded to when he said, "Oh, we just fix it in the system," right? Because then you have the discrepancy where it goes somewhere, and your documentation is here, and How do you bring those together? You should have a proper release management, if you will, of the
Mhm.
changes that you do, right? And we can talk DevOps and all that type of stuff until the cows come
We
home.
can't into it, my friend. But but
Yeah,
but but I see we're nearing the end of our time together. There's a survey. Please feel free to click that survey and let us know how you liked it or if you hated it, and what you'd like to see in the future. But before we actually let you go, Roland, if people loved what they heard, tell me a little bit more about what they can find out and how they
yeah.
can learn more about you and the things that you do around process and architecture.
So shameless pitch, shameless pitch. You heard it before. JM and I run a podcast, right?
We do,
Go to our website. It's whatsyourbaseline.com,
we
um,
do.
which you see on the left-hand side, right? There you find all the recordings, articles, other stuff, right? Just go there, and you will see some of the material. I mentioned before I wrote 2 books, right? Some of the content of the books is on the website, some of them is not. The first one was about successful architecture implementation, which is one of the topics that is very high, and that's why I wrote it first. Very high when I look at our podcast statistics. People say, "How do I get started?" The other one that you see on the right-hand side is actually what we're talking about today. How do I do successful process mining projects? And by the way, thank you, Katrin, for being a beta reader. Already know what's in there. Um, where I take that 6-step process that I just showed and I apply it. Well, I obviously talk about what's process intelligence and why do you need it and how do I get a tool and all that stuff. But the core is I have an example of a fictitious medical device company. I provide data on a companion website, um, and you can go through the book. You can go through the 6 steps, and you can do it in your process mining tool and other tools, and see if you come to the same conclusions that I came to the conclusions uh, in the book. I would love to hear from you once you've done that, um, or tell me that I'm full of pile of something, and didn't find the big thing. I'm happy for that as well. So
Hey,
I do.
listen,
I would
I
be.
don't think we're full of it, Roland, but I think that we are full for this webinar today, and I appreciate once again everyone's time. Follow the
I do have.
links, follow Roland along, and
Yeah.
also you can follow ARIS along. Go to aris.com. Listen, everything we're talking about today is something that ARIS does exceptionally well, and we'd love to hear more from you and see more of you on our future webinar series. So once again, please take our survey. Please join me in future webinars with some of my friends from around the industry, and take your first steps with BPM and process intelligence on the guidelines that Roland has laid out today. Thank you again, Roland.
Hey,
Great
thanks
met
for
you.
having me. Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.
And you see, obviously, my salesman pitch here. If you're interested in that stuff, go to our web shop. Buy any of those books. 10% off the code is there. And obviously, do me a favor. Listen to our little podcast. JM and I have a ton of fun, and we would love to you joining our audience and interact with you. Thanks, JM, for having me,
Thank you,
and
Roland. Come on.
thanks, audience, for being here.
We'll see you soon, friends. Join us for the next webinar in, I